I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure I could have kept singing that song for a while longer. It's one of those that always kind of just gets you right in the good places. It truly is wonderful to be back together on this evening. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. What's going on? What just happened? I didn't even go home. I was prepared. Now, the reason I bring that up is because of the awkwardness that I felt when I walked in earlier and everybody looked at me and was like, nope, not saying a thing, because you got me this morning. And I'm not saying a thing this time around. And it was great. It was fantastic because, yes, there was an aspect where it was kind of an object lesson, and it also kind of follows over in some ways tonight. This beautiful psalm that we just read together, Psalm 139, that's where the invitation is for you to turn tonight. We're going to read through that again, and I want you to see some beautiful, beautiful things. You see, Psalm 139, it is an invitation into God's sovereignty. Not only is it a place of peace and a place of rest, it is a place of identity, of who we are, and who we are in Him, which makes such a powerful statement for us to see. Now, I know there are parts of the psalm that you have seen before. In fact, those psalms have been used so often, and you've seen it, and you've read it, and maybe it's been in a nursery somewhere, right? For you knit me together in my mother's womb, you have known me, you've known my ways. And it's, in fact, a beautiful thing to read that and to see that, and you might know that. But the fuller context of this whole psalm is a beautiful sign of God's sovereignty, who He is and who we are in light of Him. And there is beauty and rest to be found in that. So if you are in Psalm 139, I want just to take a few moments to read, just starting from the beginning. We're going to look verse by verse along the way, and I'm just going to make some comments. And so in some ways, we're going to walk through this psalm, and I want you to see and look at the individual things that are being said and how God is stating about Himself through His servant David who He is. If you look at verse 1, it says this: O Lord, you have searched me and known me. Now, I don't know about you, but to be known by someone is different to know things about someone. I have a lot of people that I know through social media. In fact, I meet people almost on a weekly basis here who will say, I know you from social media. We have visitors that come and join us from social media. When we did the back to school blast, met a bunch of people who said, yeah, I was the one that was talking to you on that moment in those messages. Not real people in my mind, because all I remember seeing is just a profile picture, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that conversation. How often have you had a phone call where somebody calls you and then you meet them for the first time and it's like, this is not how I pictured this person? Anybody? That happens to me all the time. I'm like, really? That's that person? Did not think that did not go together. Anybody meet people whose voices do not match their bodies in your mind? That happens to me a lot. One of my favorite people that I ever met years ago, he and I were in a singing group later on, but when I first met him, 5'5" guy, bass voice. Did not see the two things together. In fact, when he first started talking, I went, what was that? Well, and he just massive bass voice. And you go, that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me in that mind. And so when I see these and knowing someone being different than knowing things about someone, you see, I know a lot of information. I know a lot of things just by social media that 10, 15 years ago would have been considered stalking. Anybody? You can look somebody up and find out information, and 15 years ago, you would have gone to prison for that type of information. Now it's like, we're Facebook friends. That's what we do. I know all sorts of crazy things about you. In fact, I will meet people and they will go, oh yeah, no, I saw that, you preached this sermon on this lesson, and I'm like, where are you from? Florida? How do you know that? Social media? And I've yet to decide if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's a good thing, those things. But there's other times when people are like, hey, I saw where you're going to be at this place. And I go, I really should not post that very often. Because knowing things about me is different than knowing me. It's easy to know things about people. You ever have somebody come up to you and say, hey, I heard something about you? And it arises within you a little, what have they heard? And there are those moments in life where that has been the norm, where I've found that, and there's just little dread that comes about. But if I can be honest with you, as I've grown older, when I hear people say those things, the anxieties have fallen away. But they've fallen away for one very key reason. To be known by God and to be known by man are two different things. God knows me in a way that no one else knows me. God knows my faults and my failures. He knows all the things that I could do wrong and have done wrong. He knows those things. He knows me, and in knowing that, still sent his son for me. And so when I hear those things now, my first reaction used to be, oh no, what will people think of me? And now my reaction tends to be, God already knows that. And what you may or may not say, honestly, doesn't mean anything because God already knows. And there's a difference between being known by others and truly being known by God. And so when David says, "O Lord, you have searched me and known me," we're talking about David, who is the man after God's own heart, right? The same man who was also an adulterer and a murderer. And yet these two things can live together because of the grace and mercy of God. And so when he says, "You know me, you've searched me and you know me," you know when I sit up and when I rise up. Sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You even know the things that I think. You search out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. David is laying out a beautiful, beautiful design, in essence, laying out before us of going, there is nothing that God does not know. And for some of us, this might bring about trepidation, and it should. Because we may be fooling ourselves into thinking that we're getting away with something in our own life. However, if there is peace and rest, and you know that God knows those things and knows all of them, and in spite of those things, he has loved you, and you, walking in the light, continue down the path of following him, even with the knowledge of those things, you can be at peace. My God knows me. There is nothing, and I will say this, there is nothing that any person can come and tell me about myself that I do not already know. And especially something that God does not already know. Will I have failures and faults along the way? Absolutely. We kind of talked about this a little bit this morning, that all of us at some point in time have failed. Now, I'm not necessarily saying sin, but we have failed, we've messed up things along that way. All of us fall into that category. And yet we get back up. That's that hypocrisy, right? Sometimes hypocrisy is just getting up. It's a man getting up the next day and trying to do better. It doesn't mean we're perfect. It means we just keep trying. We keep getting up. And with that knowledge that my God knows me, knows even the things I'm going to think and say, that in spite of those things, he still loved me enough to send his son, gives me peace and rest in this world. That's why when somebody would come to me now and say, "Hey, I heard this about you," my response typically is, "Awesome." I'm not surprised. In fact, I'm not surprised how people find out things, because you know how Satan often works? I don't know if y'all have heard about this. Y'all know gossip's a sin? Anybody? Did y'all know that? It's the socially acceptable one. I may have just stepped on some toes. You feel that heavy weight that just came on the room? Because we do this. In the South, I've said this before, there's a way that you get away with this. You just add "bless their hearts" to the end of the sentence. Well, you heard what so-and-so did, bless their hearts. And then it spreads amongst the congregation, and it spreads around. If you look back even this morning, we talked about what happens when there is disease in the roots. It'll get in and it'll kill everything else. You see, gossip does that. But to be known by God, where you are unafraid of what somebody might say about you, or in some way say, "Nope, God already knows." Not only does God already know, now it doesn't mean that there's not consequences at times for the things that happen in our life. We understand that. But to be known by God in such a way where there is not fear, but instead there is a welcoming. There is a peace that comes with, my God knows, and I have not only been forgiven of that, not only have I repented of that, you can bring it up all you want. It's not going to change who I am in the eyes of God in this moment. Yet gossip and the rest, a lot of times we love to tear each other down because we've lost at times our own identity in ourselves, because we, as I've noted before, make terrible gods. We make terrible gods in this world. We live out our lives thinking that all the things that we're doing is somehow we are in control of them. I don't know if you've just driven on 270, you're not in control. Some of you are the literal representation on 270 of people not in control. None of us are. I can't control what happens by other drivers when I'm just on my way home tonight. I can't control what other people will do or people will say about me, about my children, about anything. What I can control is what my God and I have together. The relationship that He and I have together. That I can control, and it's in submission to His sovereignty, to His way and His purpose for my life. I want you to look at these next verses because something really neat happens here. You hem me in behind and before and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful me. It is high, I cannot attain it. Where shall I go from your spirit? Where shall I flee from your presence? Now, I don't want you to think David is trying to run away. He's literally saying, I can't. You're everywhere. It's impossible. If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is bright as the day, for darkness is as light with you. David is setting forth this beautiful, beautiful imagery of you're not going to outrun God. And we might look at that as a negative and go, there's no place to hide. David's going, there's no place to hide. He's seen it. He knows it. You're not fooling him. So that's okay. He knows. So there's nothing that you can tell him that's going to shock him. There's nothing that you're going to admit to that he doesn't already know. So what are you trying to hide? What are you trying to run away from? He's already there. He's already seen it. He already knows it. Stop pretending. The only person you're fooling, again, is yourself. And this is when he turns inwardly. For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. And this is a key component that I want to dive into tonight. The days were made for you today. We don't like to think about this very often, but I did this with the college students a while back where I asked them, like, if you could be born in any century or era or the rest, what would it be? We have a weird way of like idolizing past times. Anybody in those eras? Forgetting all the negative things. My favorite is when people say, I really like the styles of the 1950s. And I'm like, you do know you had to live through the 40s to get to the 50s, right? That was kind of a rough time in the world. I don't know if you heard about that. Like a World War II. A lot of people died. And then there's people like, the 1920s were great. I'm a big fan of indoor plumbing. Anybody? Like, just huge fan. Also air conditioning. I like knowing when storms are coming. You didn't really know that back then. Outside of you looked outside or that one old man with the knee that would tell you like when it was coming. We had these things. When you look back and kind of idolize these past eras, it's easy to do that at times, and I do too. It's kind of fun. In fact, there's those games you can play online that says, what era should you have been born in? When in reality, all they're trying to do is trick and get your information for your passwords and logins. Anybody know that? Or do I need to have a class on that one day? I may need to have a class on that one day. I lay this before you because we forget something very, very personal to each one of us. But it also is something that is just dismissed outright. You were made for these days. I don't know what your family background was, but I'm just going to say it this way. You are not a mistake. You are not a mistake being here in this place, in this city right now. I'm not talking about just my family, family planning or any of that. I'm talking about you, where you are right now, are not a mistake. You were made for these days, and these days were made for you in this place right now. Psalms directly states that before those days even happened, God made you. Not some, because we do this a lot. We make it just about kind of like the royal we, the everybody. It's kind of talking about everybody else, but it's not us. David zooms in and says, no, us, me, like you. You were made for these days, and these days were made for you. And you know what that gives us ultimately in this moment? Purpose. A sovereign God gives you purpose for why you are here. And so what happens in our world? We have moments where we feel like we don't belong. Like, I don't know what I'm doing here. In fact, there were a lot of people who came in today to worship and to services and said, I don't really know where my place is in the church. I don't really understand what I'm supposed to be doing. Now, there's a lot of other things that can go into this, but the one lie that Satan has told all of us over and over again is this pointless concept of you don't belong here. Or you don't really fit in here. You're not really part of this. You don't really have a purpose. I've said before, and I'll say it again, no one lies to you like you lie to you. No one lies to you the way that you lie to you. The way that I lie to myself at times. When I don't feel good enough, strong enough, I don't know enough. And those are lies from Satan consistently, because in 2023, my God tells me through Scripture that he has a point and a purpose for me today. And the point is him. That I was made for these days. Now, some of you have figured this out yet. I talk a lot. Anybody know that? College students have figured this out. I talk a lot. I used to get in trouble for that. Anybody else get in trouble for talking in classes and things? A few of you? Yeah. You have different talents and abilities. Some of you are artistic, and you are really good at art, but you've never really used it in any way, shape, or form. I used to get in trouble for drawing. I used to get in trouble for doing all the things I wasn't supposed to be doing. And now, this is weird, I get paid to do this for a living now, the things I used to get in trouble for. And I don't know when the connection happened, when I realized that God made me different and weird, and I kind of just rolled into it and accepted it. Now, there are things about me that I have to change constantly and try to do better and grow in wisdom. I'm not referencing those things, but God has specifically made me for these days. Now, I don't want to get us all high and mighty in these moments, but for some of us you've been sitting for far too long thinking you don't have a point, that you don't serve a purpose, and there's really nothing for you to do except for just be here. That is a lie from Satan. You have a purpose in this world, and it's to glorify God through your talents and abilities that he has set forth. Not only that, but he made you that way. He made you with those talents, with those abilities, with an understanding of what he expects of you to use them for his glory. There is, I like to call them accusations that we make, and let me show you how this happens. There are questions that we pose at times to God, and they look like this. I don't know what God wants from me, is a question I hear quite a bit. And if I'm going to be honest with you, a lot of times that question is genuine and honest. I don't know what God expects from me. I don't know what God wants from me. More and more so, if I really need to set this forth, is this. A lot of times it's an accusation against God. It's not a genuine question. It's saying, I'm not good enough. I'm defective. I don't really have anything that the church can use. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a speaker. So, how's God going to use me? And I know that there are moments where it's genuine, where people really do mean, I just don't know what I'm supposed to be doing or how I can serve or what I can do. And it's because at times we minimize our own talents and abilities that God has given to us, and we don't realize their importance. I've said before, some of the greatest people that have ever influenced my lives have been people who were willing to share a meal with me, to invite me into their home. And we think that that's nothing. And we think that that doesn't matter. As I've been doing the history and researching a lot of the Buckeyes for Christ and the Biblical Studies Center and others, looking back, Greg and I have had a lot of conversations about the program through the years. And one of the things that I've learned is there is a lot of people here from 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, and you're here because someone invited you. And someone said, come to my home for dinner. Come to my home for lunch. Let's sit down. Let's spend time together. And for whatever reason, and I really do believe it's Satan, we minimize what we call the small things, instead of realizing how powerful those moments are when a community of faith says, I'm going to use my talents and abilities, and sometimes it's just cooking. And we're here. Because we think it has to be always something grandiose and grand and incredible and marvelous, instead of realizing that God works through the small things, the small moments. I can literally look out at this crowd and pick out people who would directly say, I'm here because someone invited me. Someone said, why don't you come to church with us? Or, let's meet up for breakfast. Let's have a meal together. Tell me about your life and who you are. The small things. Now, that small thing is the way we categorize it. God says, that's you using your talents and abilities to glorify me. Keep doing it. Keep utilizing those things. I have made you for these days. You are not here by accident. You are here on purpose. And so here's the question, ultimately, I kind of want to lay before you. When we talk about the sovereignty of God, that he is holy, that he is all righteous, that he is everything worthy of our praise. And with that in mind, he gives us purpose in this world to glorify him. But he made us for a reason in this time. Which means that I'm in Columbus and you're in Columbus right now for a purpose. And that purpose is to glorify him. How do I do that? You stop asking the question, well, how can I do this? And actually really mean I'm not good enough. And start thinking, okay, how do I glorify God today, even in the small things? And you got to stop saying even the word small things. And this is a problem. I'm struggling with this because I don't know how else to say it. How else to say there is no small things in light of where God is working? Instead, there is change. There is beauty. There are moments that in eternity will look miraculous. I've shared with you before the story of my good friend who, on going on a train ride to get Subway, wouldn't stop talking to this guy across the aisle, and by the time we got to Beijing or Shanghai, I can't remember which one it was, and on the way back, which he went with us on the train both ways, he had converted the man, and the man became a Christian and took on the name John because he was the one that Jesus loved, the apostle that Jesus loved. That's why he named himself John. That man, from that day forward, has now baptized 60,000 Christians because one small Chinese kid wouldn't shut up on a train ride to go eat Subway. Over and over again, these stories play themselves out in our lives, and we keep thinking that we have to see the results ourselves for it to be valid, for it to be real. My prayer constantly is that God is working in a way right now in this place consistently through daily moments where 100 years from now, there's not one church, but historically they're going to look back and go, there are 1,000 churches across Ohio because of those people who wouldn't shut up about Jesus, who wouldn't stop talking about God's sovereignty, who would not stop talking and caring. How would they do it? How in the world did that happen? They kept on inviting people to their homes, and they kept sharing meals. And they kept caring about people beyond the politics and beyond the crazy. Instead, they just did the simple things. They used their talents and abilities to glorify God. Wait, that's all it takes? No, because it's not about them. It's about how God works through those things. God's the one who does the work through those things. And if you look at the rest of this beautiful chapter, you're going to see that. Your eyes saw my unformed substance, and your book were written, every one of them, the days they were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God! How vast is the sum of them! If I would count them, they are more than the sand. I awake and I am still with you. The beauty of David saying, it's just to know the things that you expect, to know the things that you desire. It's just amazing. Now, there will be people who will work against us. As I noted, I believe Satan constantly tries to trick us and take our identity away. He tries to tell you, you're not enough, you're not good enough, you just don't listen to anybody else. In fact, this morning I even shared, I have this constant feeling that there are moments where Satan is just going, no, shh, just quiet down. He's not talking about you. He's talking about somebody else. It's not you. You need to you're fine. You're doing enough. Like that's how it works. And David's going to pivot here, and he's going to turn to what feels like a very odd shift in this, where he goes about God's sovereignty, but then he turns around and goes, oh, by the way, oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God. O men of blood, depart from me. They speak against you with malicious intent. Your enemies take your name in vain. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? Now, do you notice that this isn't about David, this is about God? Those who would blaspheme God, those who would turn against his name, evil David hated. Not because it was just that, but because it was something that was against God. And why? Because it was against God, David hates it. There are many of us in our society, in our culture today, where our consciences have been seared to evil. We just don't see it. We don't realize the things that are happening because we've just lost our ability to come to empathy and understanding. We've lost our humanity. Do you know how you regain humanity with people? You interact with other humans. You just don't see another person across a screen and think that you know them or understand them. You don't just sit down there, I call them keyboard warriors, fighting a good fight, out there destroying everybody in their midst online with no humanity, no empathy, no love, no invitation. See, he hates the things that go against the will and who God is. To have that reawaken changes everything for a church. I hate them with complete hatred. I count them my enemies. And then he switches, search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. I love that last part, lead me in way everlasting. If I were to encourage us tonight, as we go forth into this world every day, your identity in Christ and your identity in God is in his sovereignty and his righteousness. Jesus Christ came and he died on the cross and arose on the third day that we might walk in newness of life, that our sins might be washed away through the waters of baptism. And God, in his eternal sovereignty, continues to stand before us and go, I made you for these days. Bear fruit. I have a purpose for you. You are not an accident. And let me also put this. If you have breath in your lungs, God still has a purpose for you, because did you note he says, I know the days and even the days until the very end. Which means you don't get to retire from God. That's not a thing. Nor are you too young to serve. That's also not a thing. But instead, each one of us in these days that have been made for us, we seek to serve God to his glory, that he might be given honor and glory and all due. For he is righteous and he is sovereign. And when there are things in this world that are evil, he calls us to say that is evil. It's not of God. We will have nothing to do with it. But otherwise, he calls us in our daily lives to engage with one another as humans, to also realize that the people that you come across each and every day are also made for these days, and these days were made for them, so that they might, perchance, come across a believer who shares with them the good news. And so I leave you with who's going to be in heaven tomorrow because of something you do today. Who's going to be in eternity, whose life is being changed because you glorify God with who you are today. In spite of ourselves, God works through us. And you have that opportunity tonight. If you are not a believer, if you are not a Christian, let me encourage you to realize that God is calling you home, that he has sent his son to die for you, that you might come and die to yourself and glorify him, because you were made for these days, and these days were made for you. If you are and you're struggling, or you don't know, and maybe it's a genuine, I don't know how I can serve, I guarantee you there are a lot of ways for you to serve in this community. I guarantee you it can start with as simple as, who do I just need to connect with on a human level? Who's sitting on the outskirts of our congregation that needs to be invited closer in? You know the difference between a hug and a real hug? Have you felt those before? You ever met somebody who, like, you meet them and it's nice, but then there's the person who just won't let go, and it feels different. Sometimes the church can feel like just one of those generic hugs, and it's time to draw people closer. It's time to draw them really in. Maybe it's a coworker that simply needs an encouraging word where you say, hey, are you okay? I just want you to know that if you ever need anything, we're here for you. When I say we, I mean me and my church and my family. We'd love to help you. If you want to study, if you want to know more about God, we do that every week. There's dozens of times a week, times that you can come and study with someone. We'd love to help with that. But I don't know where you are. Maybe it's just tonight you need to think more, to spend more time just in thought, going, God, use me. Help me to get out of my own way. Help me to realize your sovereignty, and that I'm no longer going to make excuses about what I can and cannot do, but instead, I will trust that you know me and you made me. And because of that, I'm going to serve you. And I'm going to serve you in the days that you give me on this earth until I breathe my last or you return. That's what I will do. If you have a need tonight, will you come as together we stand and as we sing?